Good evening. I'm Pat Callahan. We begin with a little programming note. Right now, newly confirmed Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh is being sworn in during a ceremonial event at the White House. He's already taken the oath a couple of times over the weekend. NBC News is offering a special report. We're carrying that live online. If you'd like to watch that, you can head to newscentermaine.com. But tonight, here in the studio, we're going to hear from the candidates for Congress in Maine's sprawling 2nd District, the largest geographically east of the Mississippi. And it is one of the most fiercely contested races in the nation this year, as you have no doubt noticed if you've looked at a screen over the past couple of months, with more money being spent on advertising here than any other district save one. So let's meet the candidates. The incumbent is Republican Bruce Poliquin of Oakland. He's a former state treasurer seeking his 3rd term in Washington. The Democrat is Jared Golden, a state representative from Lewiston. He served as a United States Marine in Iraq and Afghanistan. There are 2 independents in the race. Tiffany Bond is an attorney from Portland. She has not held elective office. And Will Hoare is a special education teacher from Southwest Harbor. This is her first run for elective office. I'll be posing questions to the candidates. We'll also have some of your questions submitted via Facebook and Twitter. You can join on the conversation using hashtag #MEO2Debate. Each candidate will have 1 minute for a closing statement, and we'll get to that later in the hour. We want to begin the questioning tonight, however, with Will Hoare. Mr. Hoare, you've never held public office. Your campaign, I think you would admit, is pretty low profile. Why do you think voters ought to trust someone with the big job of being the congressman for the 2nd District without any particular experience in that area?
Well, we elected a president without any experience in the area. And I have experience working with and living amongst the people of the 2nd District. I work in special education. I am involved in helping the opioid crisis on my own end, one person. And this is an opportunity to help more people. I know the issues because I'm amongst them.
Ms. Bond, you're in an unusual situation. You can't vote for yourself in this election because you don't live in the 2nd District. I don't know, do you believe there's a lot of voters in the 2nd District who think that's a good thing? Do you have confidence that they'll overlook the fact you don't live in their district and vote for you?
Sure. Well, I work in the district. I spend a lot of my time there. If you were to go through courts throughout the 2nd Congressional District, you'd see my name in a bunch of filings. So I do spend a good portion of my time there. I run a small business, so it takes a while to move a small business into that area. I've been expanding my practice for a few years now, going further north and west, and we're slowly moving towards a move there, and it's been in the books for about 5 years.
Representative Golden, you of course talked about the number of political ads that have been running in this race. It's quite extraordinary. And some of the ads that are attacking you suggest that if you're elected, you'll support Nancy Pelosi as Speaker and a far left-leaning agenda. How do you respond to that?
Thank you, Pat. That's an easy one for me. Since the day I got into this election back in August of 2017, I made very clear that I was calling for a new generation of leaders in this country. And I've also been very clear that I don't think that includes Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. I don't think it includes Congressman Paul Ryan either. I mean that in the sincerest way possible. With due respect to both, I think that we need new leaders in Congress. I think that's very much evidenced in the past week. And I've been endorsed by this group called With Honor, who is endorsing Republicans and Democrats, 18 Republicans, all veterans, many of them of Afghanistan and Iraq. I would suggest that right there in that group of 36 individuals, we have a potential good future leader in Congress.
Congressman Poliquin, unlike many Republicans across the country and even some Republicans running for other offices in Maine, you haven't really spent a lot of time touting your support for President Trump in the last election. You wouldn't even say whether you were voting for him or not. But your voting record, compiled by the website of 538, shows your votes fall in line with President Trump's positions 96.7% of the time. Given that, is it possible for you to win support outside of the voters who are the Donald Trump base?
Yeah, I believe it is, Pat. And I'll tell you why. I am the only person on this stage that has job creation experience. Before I went into public office and ran for governor in 2010, became state treasurer, I ran small businesses and created jobs for 35 years. Nobody else on stage has that experience. Now, when you want a job and you're a small business and you're growing the economy with jobs, you want someone who understands how to grow the economy. And you know, I've been central to making sure we have less red tape, lower taxes, fair trade deals, and it's working. The economy is doing great, Pat. We have the lowest unemployment rate in Maine since I think the 1950s. We have more jobs available than people. Nobody here has that experience of creating any jobs. I do, and that's why the people of Maine, I think, are going to send me back there to continue my work.
All right, let's get to some of the issues. We'll start with Ms. Bond. Does any effort to put restrictions on firearms violate the Second Amendment?
No, I think that we can have a conversation about that, and we should be talking about who and what should not be had in society. I think it's reasonable to say that there are some people who just shouldn't have weapons. For example, perpetrators of domestic violence. They should not have access to weapons. And maybe there's some weapons we don't need. I don't think we should probably have tanks running around. So I think it's important to have a healthy conversation on what and where we put those restrictions, but also to take the laws that are currently on the books and really be effective with them. Right now, they don't work very well together, so let's work out the kinks a little bit, get some data, and see what makes sense to help keep our kids, my kids, safe.
Representative Golden, are there restrictions that need to be added without violating the Second Amendment?
Well, what I believe, Pat, is very simple, and I think it's where most Mainers stand on the issue. So I think what Congress needs to do, what people in state governments need to do, is try and keep a limited number of bad actors from getting their hands on any firearms to begin with. Outside that, I think that what we should, I just think it's important that beyond that we protect people's Second Amendment rights. So what do those types of individuals look like? I would say I agree with Tiffany, people who have committed acts of domestic violence, felons, people who are suffering from mental illness that is so badly that they may be a risk to themselves or to others, or beyond that, maybe people on no-fly lists would be terrorists and others. I think we all agree we don't want them to have access to firearms, and so we got to do what we have to do as policymakers to keep that firearms from falling into their hands. And beyond that, no, I don't think that anyone should be restricting people's Second Amendment rights.
Congressman Poliquin?
Yeah, this is a very important issue, Pat, with our Second District families. I am the only person on this stage who has a proven record of standing up for our Second Amendment rights. Jared has a D rating with the NRA. Jared has an F rating with the Gun Owners of Maine. He didn't even talk to the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine when they're asking probably why do you have a D rating and an F rating. I voted repeatedly and stood up for our Second Amendment rights. I have A rating with the NRA. Jared has a D rating. I have an A+ rating with the Gun Owners of Maine. Jared has an F rating, and I've been endorsed by the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. Everybody you know in the state of Maine who's a sportsman or woman knows that I'm the one who has proven to stand up for their constitutional rights. Jared will not.
How meaningful is that?
Thank you, Pat. Now, Bruce just suggested that he's the only one that has done anything to protect people's Second Amendment rights. That's just not true. He's lying about my record. I've taken votes in the Maine state legislature to ban government from having any kind of registry of gun ownership whatsoever. I've taken votes to say that the ATF cannot go to gun sellers and request ATF forms on gun sales unless there's a pending criminal investigation. Those are protecting people's Second Amendment rights right there. Now, I got dinged by the NRA because I took a stand to protect the victims of domestic abuse. So be it. I think that it is very important that we be strong on this issue of domestic violence. It's the #1 cause of homicide. Year in and year out, I'm strong on domestic violence. If Bruce doesn't agree with that, then I think that should be of concern to the people in the district. This is just what policy making is. I'm looking for good, common sense policies that do not infringe upon people's rights unless it is absolutely necessary to protect people from things like domestic violence.
Pat, he referenced me, so I'd like to respond if I can. Jared is a young radical that embraces a socialist agenda. He cannot be trusted with our Second Amendment rights. He has a D rating with the NRA. I have an A rating. He has an F rating with the Gun Owners of Maine. I have an A+ rating. He wouldn't even speak to Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine when they want to ask him, presumably, about this. I've been endorsed by them, and I will stand up and have proven to stand up for our Second Amendment rights. Hang on, Pat.
I want to get Will Hoare in on this, too, but I want you to respond to the charge that was just made about your political leanings.
Thank you, Pat. Here's the thing. I've never filled out the form for the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. I have worked in the legislature with them for 4 years now. I never filled out the form, and that was never a problem until now. The issue is being politicized. In the legislature, I've worked with Sam on many of their top priorities, like requiring that signatures be gathered in both districts things like bear baiting, like question 3 on background checks. I was there on one of Sam's top priorities. I'm very surprised that they would politicize this issue, but when I'm in Congress, they don't have to worry. I will continue to work with them.
I want to hear from Will Hoare on this one too.
Well, I think gun owners and gun owners and hunters of Maine deserve the protection of their guns. Most hunters are all hunters that I know are very responsible. But right now it's easier to get a gun than to get a driver's license. And one kills a lot more people than the other. So I believe there's, again, sensible legislation that can be made without impinging on the rights of Mainers in the 2nd Congressional District.
Now, I want to move on to talking about health care, because it's another important issue. It's going to take up a lot of time, I'm sure, too. So let me start with Representative Golden. The country, it's clear, is not ready for Medicare for all, as some have promoted, and I think it's an idea that you've expressed some interest in. So what would you do in the interim? I mean, if that's your ultimate goal you want to work for, that's going to take a long time. What can you do in the interim, in the short term, to try to improve access to health care, and actually what can Congress do to affect health care costs?
Thank you, Pat. The status quo is unacceptable. It is costing people in this state so much. And what we need to do is, in the short term, I think, take a couple of very small steps. First of all, we can go ahead and continue to protect Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. That's something Maine voters agree with me on. Secondly, I think that we could allow people age 55 and older who want to buy into Medicare because they don't have an affordable option in the private sector to go ahead and do that if that's competitive and it helps them get more affordable coverage. I also think that would be very good, and we are the oldest population in the nation. So we got a lot of people who are perhaps 60, 62 years old, ready to retire. They're waiting for Medicare to do that. They have very high health care costs, and they have a lot of health care needs. I also think there is no rational reason whatsoever why Congress has not given Medicare and Medicaid the authority to negotiate for lower drug prices. We allow the Department of Veterans Affairs to do that. That is also, I think, a very significant reform that Congress should be going after. Now, since I already know what's coming, I'm also going to go ahead and just say that we know what the record of Bruce Poliquin is in Congress. He voted to repeal the ACA without any plan to replace it whatsoever. That was a bill that would have allowed insurers to charge people over the age of 50 up to 5 times more. It is something that would have allowed states to opt out of providing protections for people with pre-existing conditions. 1 in 5 people in Maine are on Medicaid, and that bill contained very deep cuts, would have been very bad for our rural hospitals, would have been very bad for people living in the 2nd District. So my record is clear.
Sure, yeah. Jared, Pat, is a young radical that embraces a socialist agenda, and he just throws stuff up on the TV, and Nancy Pelosi's his biggest backer, so they put all these ads up on TV that are just not true. Now, let me give you an example. I was one of 3 Republicans in the country in the House a couple years ago, one of my first votes, I guess it was 3 years ago, 2015, not to repeal the ACA because there was no viable replacement. Now, a couple years after that, during which I introduced a 14-point plan based on the Maine plan to lower the cost of health insurance, lower the cost by expanding competition and more choice. And let me finish. And it worked. Now, Jared embraces a radical, risky scheme that will end private health care. So all the folks that are listening tonight, if you get your health insurance through your employer, and about half the people in Maine do, it's canceled. Everyone is pushed into a 100%. Let me finish.
Let's talk about those ACA cuts. Even Senator Collins said they were devastating.
Pat, may I finish this? He had the chairman, and we'll get back to it. 100% government-run health care costs $32 trillion, double everybody's taxes, and end Medicare as we know it. Now, there are seniors like my mom, who's 90, and my dad's who's 88. They paid into Medicare their entire life. Good luck trying to get a doctor's appointment. Good luck trying to control your premiums when everyone's pushed into a 100% government-run bureaucracy. It's the wrong way to go.
Let's bring it back to the original question for Will Hoare, and that is, what can you do in Congress to address this if it's not Medicare for all right away or anything like that? What's the first step you're going to take?
Well, I think the first step that we have to take is, as much as Representative Poliquin protests, like, he did vote against the Affordable Care Act. plain and simple. We need to stop repealing what's already been in place. It's not a perfect solution. It's out of the reach of most Americans. It's out of the reach of me. It's out of my price pocket. But it's in place, and it is a plan. It has provided health care for millions of people, but we need to improve it to make it affordable for the American people.
Tiffany Bond, how do you come in on this?
You know, I was really excited to see what the Republican plan would be for handling the ACA, because the ACA, I read it when it was a draft. I read it twice. I read it at about 1,400 pages, and when it was over 2,000, I don't know many people can say that. And I was excited. I was excited to see it. And it turned out it was 140 pages, and it was awful. And they had 7 years. I was really expecting more. I think what we need to do is we need to look at philosophies that are politically viable. So let's take a look at taking Medicaid specifically and expanding that to everybody and allowing a choice-based solution. If you would like to have government-provided health care, you can. And that will allow competition. It will shore up that fund. I want to stay away from Medicare. I want to do it with Medicaid. And I think that's a great way to do it. We should be taking the law as it is now, and every step we make be an improvement. We should be expanding coverage. We should be reducing costs. We should be addressing how providers are handled. And I'm what the ACA sucks for, right? I'm the whole. I'm in the I can afford just enough to pay premiums that make sure that I can't go to the doctor. I run a small business, and it's awful to be in that space. Let's fix it.
All right, we need to take a break. We'll be back with more of our Voice of the Voter Forum with the candidates for Congress in the 2nd District right after this.
Who works for Maine veterans and healthcare? Our Congressman, Bruce Poliquin.
Bruce listens and he really cares.
The ads that Jared Golden are running against Bruce Poliquin are just not true.
Bruce is a man of action. He's getting our local hospitals paid by the VA. He's saving healthcare and jobs for Maine people.
Bruce gets the job done. We need to keep Bruce Poliquin working for Maine.
I'm Bruce Poliquin, and I approve this message.
What's in a vote? Is it just a simple yes or no? Ask Bruce Poliquin. Would he take protections away for people with pre-existing conditions? Yes. Allow insurance companies to charge older Americans 5 times more for health care? Yes. Increase health care costs for Maine families by over $4,000 while threatening cuts to Medicare? Yes. Maine's vote is that simple. Bruce Poliquin? No. DCCC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
33 years ago, I met and married my husband, Stan. He was a widower with 5 young daughters. We had a really good life. A few years ago, he had a stroke, and he was in and out of hospitals for a year before he passed away. What we were going through, dealing with high deductibles, the huge cost of prescription drugs, was nothing different than what thousands of Maine families go through. So I'm running for governor to fight for them, to lower costs, to work for a system that works for us.
Excuse me, this bill is almost double what I was expecting.
Well, it covers all your work, and then some.
Then some?
Like office supplies.
Those are fish.
Well, I'm off to the club.
Then some?
Okay, let's try something new.
And here's your statement.
I could hug you.
Bring it in.
At Aspen Dental, we're a different kind of dentist. Not covered by insurance? Get a free new patient exam. Schedule online or call 1-800-ASPEN-DENTAL.
Talking with the 4 candidates for Congress in Maine's 2nd District. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can go to News Center Maine Facebook Live page and be involved there. We want to begin this round with Congressman Poliquin. What ideas have you got that are going to help save rural Maine? I mean, the 2nd District has a lot of rural people and struggling to find work. It's hard to get businesses to move in there. What can you do in Congress? What's the next step to help with that?
Well, first of all, the economy is doing well, Pat, because I've been worked very hard to make sure we have less red tape, lower taxes, and fair trade deals. Nobody here on stage has any experience creating jobs I do. That's number one, our economy is doing better. Number 2, access to health care is absolutely critical because you're not going to move to any part of the state of Maine unless you have access to health care. I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I worked really hard to get one of the few remaining seats on that committee. I worked across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, a very bipartisan committee, and with Susan Collins in the Senate. And we now have a situation, it's signed into law, where veterans can get their health care closer to home. So if you live in Fort Kent, you don't have to drive 5 or 6 hours to Togus. Here's why this is so important, Pat. Because now these small hospitals have new customers, have our veterans, and we got to make sure they get paid such that these small hospitals stay open, and it's great for the whole community. Access to health care, taking care of our veterans closer to home, making sure our small hospitals get paid, and then you know another one, Pat? Critically important. These trade deals have got to be fair. Nobody else has this experience doing this. I do. Let me give you an example. Kathy Leonard, who owns Auburn Manufacturing, she came to us about a year ago and said, Bruce, there are a bunch of Chinese companies that are violating a trade agreement. They're illegally being subsidized by their government. They're dumping product here. We can't compete. We worked with Kathy every step of the way. I testified before the International Trade Commission. We won. Now there are, I don't know what it is, 40, 50, 60% tariffs being put on these Chinese products coming into America. Now Kathy and her 50 employees are on a level playing field. They can now compete and win. These trade deals have got to be fair. That's one of the things I've been working really hard on down in Washington. Nobody else here has any of that experience.
Will Hoare, what would you work on to try to improve the economy in rural Maine, make it possible for people to stay and make a living there?
Well, I think we need to appeal to the natural characteristic of Mainers, which is the independent entrepreneurial spirit of them. We need infrastructure. We need broadband. Rural America is underserved, full stop. And Washington needs to put an infusion of cash into these areas. We need to make it easier for you to live in a rural community and to start a business if you wanted to. And that means you need to be connected to the World Wide Web, which, it's the 21st century, and most stuff happens online. And you need to have roads that get you there, and you need to have the money to start the businesses.
And these are not things that private businesses are going to invest in unless there's some profit in it. So the government has to step in, you think?
I believe it, yes. I mean, that's why there's no broadband up here yet, because, private telecommunications companies don't think that it's profitable enough to warrant, getting all the way up here.
Tiffany Bond, what do you think?
I'd like to echo, I think rural broadband is probably one of the most important things we can be doing. And I think we need to be really realistic about what Congress actually does and doesn't do. Rural broadband is something that can happen through Congress. It is something we could work in conjunction with whoever the governor is. And I think the other things we could do, we could look at state sovereignty and look at descheduling things like marijuana. We could do a tremendous amount of research, medical research in Maine that would drive the economy well. I think we could also use it for recreational tourism for those communities that wish to indulge that. And I think the economy isn't doing great in the 2nd Congressional District. I think if you're saying that, it's a little bit disingenuous. I work with families when they're separating, and I can tell you there just isn't enough. When you're working with families that make an average of $40,000 a year and you try to split that into 2 households, in a lot of communities, your only option for work is Dunkin' Donuts.
Jared Golden, I know you wanted to address a comment that Congressman Poliquin made a couple of times in the first segment.
Thank you, Pat. Now, we've been on TV here for all of about 20 minutes, and the amount of lies coming out of Bruce's mouth are astounding. Now, twice already, he's called me a socialist. So I just want to address this, Pat, very clearly for people. First of all, I served this country in Afghanistan and Iraq. Second, my first job in politics was working for a U.S. Senator, Susan Collins, a Republican, on the Homeland Security Committee in the U.S. Senate. Lastly, through 4 years in the Maine State Legislature, I've worked across the aisle with Republicans on a number of very important bills and pieces of legislation to help veterans, to protect youth from suicide, to make sure that we protect children from lead poisoning. Those bills would not become law if I were pushing some kind of socialist agenda. Now, let me tell you what's going on here. When Bruce says that, what he is suggesting is that I am somehow un-American. That is absolutely despicable, Pat.
Is that what you're suggesting, Congressman?
No, not at all. Jared Golden is the majority whip in the State House, Pat. That is a uniquely partisan job. Jared's job is to get all the Democrats together to vote in a pack. It's not to be bipartisan. Now, he mentioned Susan Collins. Susan Collins supports me, so I don't know why he keeps mentioning it to her. But here's another thing that's really important. Jared embraces a socialist agenda. Now, it's his decision
That's a lie, Pat.
That's his
It's just
decision.
another lie.
It's his decision to do it. Let me give you an example. Jared thinks it's a good idea to use welfare dollars to buy alcohol, tobacco, lottery tickets, and bail yourself out of jail. Here's another one, Pat. There's an organization in Maine called the Maine People's Alliance. Jared is a donor to the Maine People's Alliance, the most radical organization in Maine. They've endorsed him. He has welcomed that endorsement. And last week, it was the organization he donates to that busts people down to Washington to scream at Senator Collins, intimidate her. They're the same people who go out with bullhorns outside of our office. They didn't intimidate Senator Collins. They don't intimidate me. They're a socialist.
I want to get back to an actual issue here.
This is just an example of dirty politics, Pat. Now, here's an example of how Bruce is misleading people. He says that he supports access to health care. He voted to take it away from people. He says he supports better trade deals and things like tariffs, but the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is running ads thanking him for being anti-tariff. Bruce wants to be on both sides of every issue. You just can't trust him to be straightforward. That's all there is to it.
Well, wait a minute.
Before you go on, I just want to. I just kind of want to bring it back to the question at hand, which is, the economy. Here again, right now, we're getting into character debates, and I just wanted to clarify because I see it all the time on the news that the economy is doing fantastically well. But I know so many people who are still looking for work or are underpaid or having to have 2 or 3 jobs because they don't have enough money. The economy up here does not reflect what keeps coming out of Washington.
And we began this talking about ideas for improving the economy in the 2nd District, so I want you to give us an answer on that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Pat. I agree with Tiffany. Maine's economy is not doing that good. Now, unemployment is low, but wages are also very low. We've lost a lot of good paying jobs, and what Congress should be doing is working together to try and push for better jobs. Now, the President of the United States ran on a platform of rebuilding America, and I don't know why this Republican-controlled Congress has not done a big infrastructure package, which could include things like broadband, would create good-paying middle-class jobs. Instead, what they went for was to repeal the ACA, to go for deep cuts to Medicaid. And as a result, rural hospitals in Maine's 2nd District and all of the good middle-class jobs that are there would have been put at deep risk of being lost. That is the record of Bruce Poliquin on this economy, and I believe he has completely let the people of this district down. Now, one more thing, Pat. The only person sitting up here who is any risk to anyone's Medicare whatsoever, all of our seniors here in the 2nd District, everyone who is paying into that program, his record is very clear. He supports the Paul Ryan budget that would privatize Medicare. That would destroy Medicare as we know it.
Congressman?
Wow, we got a lot of whoppers over here. Jared has a hard time telling the truth, Pat. Jared voted, for example, 100% of the time against Maine small businesses. That's not my score, that's the NFIB, 100% of the time. He has repeatedly voted to increase taxes like sales taxes and income taxes. He is an extreme radical that would put this economy back in the ditch. What we have been doing is lowering taxes, less red tape, fair trade, and the economy. I'm not through.
Well, let's talk about the infrastructure question.
Please, if I may, he came at me with 4 or 5 things that are just untrue. Now, I also want to tell you, Jared, you might not know this. My son Sam has a pre-existing condition. I raised him from the time he was a peanut in diapers. My mother is a nurse. She had a great career, a strong woman in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
The bill would have allowed people to lose coverage who have pre-existing conditions.
Absolutely.
And how do you protect those conditions? How do you protect those people with pre-existing conditions? Because there's nothing there yet.
Well, Pat, wait a minute. If you look at the bill that I voted on, it includes specifically covering those with pre-existing conditions. You know how it does it? It does it through what we did in Maine, through an invisible high-risk pool that Senator Collins supports. It drives down the cost, covers everybody with pre-existing conditions. Jared's just not telling the truth.
All right, back to the economy, because we talked about infrastructure in terms of broadband. What about the crumbling bridges and roads? There's hundreds of them in the district that are dangerously deficient. How do you deal with that, Tiffany Bond?
Well, I think that's something that definitely needs to be included in a federal spending package. And we need to be ranking and prioritizing, not just based on who travels and how travels, or how people travel, but what areas need it the most. We have so many bridges and so many roads that are a joy to drive if you're looking at the scenery, but not a joy to drive on. And I think that that is such a key component for this district, because it addresses not just how we transport goods and services through, but it's also for tourism.
But how do you pay for it? Do you have to raise gas taxes? What do you do? Because cars are more fuel efficient. If people use less gas, you get less in gas taxes.
Maybe you buy one less bomb.
Will Horf, what do you think? How do you deal with the crumbling infrastructure, physical infrastructure?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it goes beyond bridges and tunnels. It also goes to piping. We can't assure clean water. There are tons of Americans and people in Maine who they find traces of lead. If they're tested, the water is undrinkable, and we need to put the money in.
Congressman, when President Trump came into office, one of the things he said he was going to do first is propose an infrastructure package, which probably could have been bipartisan. It hasn't shown up yet. Is there anything happening in Congress that addresses this problem?
Yes, the president is a builder. All of us need to make sure we get the infrastructure done. It didn't happen this Congress. It will likely happen next Congress. That's one of the reasons, Pat, that a couple weeks ago I had the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture up here, Sonny Perdue. We came to Farmington, Maine. We sat down with a round table with business leaders and talking specifically about how we can help rural America. One of the ways to do it is to make sure that we have more rural broadband, because if you can't have high-speed internet, you can't run a business, you can't stay in touch with your senior parents, in my case, or you can't, you just can't run your economy. You can't live the way you should. Now, I will say this. About 80 years ago or so, it was rural America that didn't have electricity. And the government stepped in and helped out and electrified rural America. We need to do the same thing when it comes to high-speed internet. And I'll tell you, the reason I had Sonny Perdue come up here, the Secretary of the USDA, is because a lot of this funding for rural broadband is coming through the Department of Agriculture. That's why he was here. We've got to make sure we get this done, but we got to be able to pay for it.
Representative Golden, we were talking about physical infrastructure and how you pay for that. How do you pay for fixing roads and bridges?
Well, I think that it's a discussion of priorities. So again, we can prioritize taking away people's health care like Congress did, like Bruce Poliquin did. We have a very expensive health care system that we're not getting a handle on. We're allowing all these private insurers to make all of this money. And as a result, they didn't put the priority on rebuilding our roads and our bridges, Pat. But what I really want to talk about is taxes, because this is, I think, how we can talk about how we pay for repairing our roads and our bridges. Bruce voted for a tax plan in Congress in December of 2017 that was completely unpaid for. It skyrockets our debt, added over $1 trillion to our debt. We're now looking at annual budget shortfalls of $1 trillion. And that right there is money that could have gone into roads and bridges. Now, Bruce keeps lying about my record on taxes to deflect from his own, because here's the truth. In the Maine state legislature, I voted to take, for middle-class families, their state income tax from 7.9 to 7.1. We also took the rate at which that marginal rate kicks in from $20,000 to $50,000. That's a middle-class tax cut. If you own a home in Maine and you use the property tax exemption, I also voted to increase that deduction from $10,000 to $20,000. That again is a middle-class tax cut. I just voted this year to lower the corporate tax rate for small businesses in Maine. I just voted to create a deduction of up to 20% of a small business's pass-through income. Bruce just tried to claim that I never, ever have supported small businesses, yet my family runs one. It's a complete lie. It is unbelievable. Now, here's what's most concerning about Bruce's tax plan: is as a result of those big deficits that they are now running up, Bruce and Paul Ryan have been very clear that they're going to come after middle-class benefits that are critically important to the people of Maine. That's Medicare and Social Security, and he already voted to try and take away Medicaid coverage for 1 in 5 Mainers.
Your response?
Yeah, this is wow. Jared just has a problem with the truth. He's a young radical that believes in a socialist agenda. I want to make sure I show this to everybody, and Jared, you'll have a chance to look at it too. This is my mother's Medicare card. I'm Mom's guardian. She's 90 years old, Dad is 88. They paid into the Medicare program their entire lives. This is not an entitlement. They have earned this. Nobody is going to take away. I'm not done, Pat, if I may. No one's going to take away
but
Mom's
Bruce
Medicare.
Has openly supported privatizing Medicare. He has
I would
openly
like to respond to
supported
this. He keeps going on
hiding
and on.
behind
Is that true?
Now,
Do you want to privatize Medicare?
I want to make, of course not. I want to make sure Medicare is supported. I've always voted to make sure it's strengthened. I always will. But I'll tell you another thing, is that it doesn't make any sense to ruin Mom's Medicare program like everybody else, where everybody who has private insurance gets pushed into a 100% government-run program, $32 trillion cost, doubles taxes, and there's absolutely no way to pay for it. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Now, I'll tell you what I do support, Pat.
Actually, we have a lot of people weighing in, and we're going to get on
Wait a minute, wait. Jared had a lot.
His record is what it is. He supports privatizing Medicare. He voted to cut Social Security.
He's being
he
very
voted
rude.
to repeal the Affordable Care Act.
Very rude. I'd like to respond. Jared talks about taxes. The NFIB, which is the largest small business organization in the state, they give you a 0% rating. You voted against small businesses 100% of the time,
we just went
including
over that.
raising sales tax.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we've got a lot of your questions coming in via social media. We're going to address some of those when the Voice of the Voter Candidate Forum continues.
Mornings can be busy, so you need to decide quickly what type of weather is ahead with Newscenter's School Bell Forecast. Make sure the kids have an umbrella when they leave the house. You kind of like this guy. He's pretty good. At the bus stop, you're gonna need this. At recess, and heading home. Hey, buddy. The School Bell Forecast, it's a slam dunk. Weekdays on the Morning Report.
On TV, Jared Golden talks about healthcare. What he doesn't tell you is that he supports a government takeover of healthcare that would end Medicare as we know it. Golden's plan would cost taxpayers $32 trillion and nearly double the national debt. And he'd pay for it by raising tax rates nearly 20%. Jared Golden, higher taxes for you, putting Maine seniors at risk. Congressional Leadership Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
I'm Jared Golden, and I approve this message.
I'm a Republican.
And I'm a Democrat. But here, we're just Mainers looking for common ground.
In Augusta, Jared and I work together to cut taxes for the middle class.
Lower property taxes for homeowners.
And cut red tape for small businesses, including craft brewers. I used to vote for Bruce Poliquin, but not after he voted to take away health care for more than 100,000 Mainers. So this year, I'm working with Jared on something else, sending him to Congress.
Maine is a big state. In fact, nearly as big as all the other New England states combined. But despite our geographic size, we're really one community. And Newscenter Maine is here to keep us all connected. On TV, on our app, on our website, and on our social media networks. We're committed to telling the stories of Maine every day. And our mission is to make life better for all of us. Newscenter Maine, your Maine connection.
I'll introduce you. Welcome back to our News Center Voice of the Voter Campaign Forum. We're here with the candidates for Congress in Maine's 2nd District. I'm joined now by News Center Maine's Lindsay Mills, who has been listening in on the conversation and the questions on social media.
Pat, everyone's fingers are on the keyboards or on their smart devices. They're joining this conversation using the hashtag ME02Debate. Thank you to everyone who has contributed so far. First up, we have a question from Gail on Facebook. She asks, how will Mr. Poliquin create jobs in the poorest county, Washington County?
The largest employer in Washington County is the old Woodland Mill. It's St. Croix Tissue in Baileyville. They have about 500 jobs, good paying jobs with benefits. I was just in Baileyville about 6 days ago, specifically meeting with the workers as they came in. And I'll tell you, they're excited because they're doing well. Here's why. Number one, we lowered the tax rates for the workers so they can keep more of their own money. We lowered the tax rates for our employers such they can now invest more in their mills. Let me tell you, the Baileyville Mill used to produce, I believe it was newsprint or super calendar paper. They're now making tissue now. If you go to the Hinckley mill, the Sappi mill in Hinckley, they used to produce the same product. Now they're making pet food bags. If you go up north in Madawaska, they've retooled their machines, so now they're making medication instructions. That's the paper that they print on. So we've got to make sure that all of these mills in Washington County and Aroostook County have the opportunity to reinvest, retool, and they're doing well. The other point that's really important, the second largest employer, if I'm not mistaken, in Washington County is the local hospital over in Machias. There's also a very important hospital in Calais Regional. Both of those hospitals employ several hundred people, I think, together. And they were having a hard time getting paid by the Veterans Administration for providing health care to our veterans. I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I worked across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, and with Senator Collins over in the Senate to make sure our veterans can receive health care closer to home. But they got to get paid. And I've been pushing like heck. It's now cemented in law. They got to get paid within 30 days or they accrue interest. We've got to make sure we have a business-friendly environment. The economy is doing better everywhere. We don't want to go backwards by raising taxes, adding more red tape.
All right, let's move on.
Yes, we have to get to everybody. Michael has a question for Jared Golden. Why are you against privatization of the healthcare system?
Actually, I think that the person that is writing in is confused. I don't have a problem with private insurers. I just think that currently the system is too expensive. And so what I actually support is improving our Medicare program, like I talked about earlier, allowing people age 55 or older to buy into that program if it's more affordable for them. I also support Medicaid expansion. And now getting back to jobs in Washington County, which I would also like to talk about, I believe that what Congress should have done to create jobs in places like Washington County and support small businesses would be to invest in infrastructure and broadband, things that help small businesses that can't afford to make those investments for themselves. Unfortunately, what Congress did was voted to repeal the ACA, which contained very deep cuts to Medicaid. Now, rural hospitals and the people that run them were very clear that without Medicaid, those hospitals would close. Bruce voted to put all those jobs in Washington County hospitals
he's making it very clear over here. I want to have a chance to respond to this.
That's only fair.
Two more questions, yeah.
Well, but I also, we've talked about this idea of having private or public insurance as if they can't exist together.
Gets rid of private insurance. Jared plan pushes everybody into a government-run healthcare program, costs $32 trillion, doubles taxes. If you have your private insurance through your employer, it's gone, it's canceled because everyone's pushed into a government run. That's his plan.
That's simply not true, Bruce. You can keep saying that, but it's not true.
The other thing I'd like to say, which is really important, is that I have always voted to fully fund Medicaid. That's our Maine Care program. Now, the federal government sends money up to Maine. Jared should know this. Sends money up to Maine, and then the state of Maine decides how it's going to be dispersed, right? We have fully funded Medicaid. I've always done that. We need to make sure we have a safety net that's good and strong for those with disabilities and for those who cannot take care of themselves. And again, Jared's plan, it is very clear. It's 100% government-run health care. You have private insurance, it's gone. He just told another big fib right in front of everybody in Maine.
You're lying about my record, and you're also hiding from your voting record, which is very clear. You voted to cut Medicaid for 1 in 5 people in this state. You put all those jobs in Washington County hospitals at risk.
Jared, I don't know where you're getting this.
Tiffany
You've got a problem with the truth.
This is why we're getting nothing done. I'd love a question.
Sure thing.
Okay,
let's move on. So this question comes from Razel. This one we will ask to Tiffany and to Will Hoare, but Tiffany, you can answer first. Since many of our youth leave the state, what do you plan to do to educate our adults who do not have a high school diploma, low-level literacy, and are held hostage to low-wage jobs?
Sure. I have 4 degrees, but I started at community college. I don't have a high school diploma. I don't have a GED. I just went straight to school. And I think that we need to really open up those opportunities to people. I would have never guessed in my 20s, at 27 when I entered college, that I would now be a practicing attorney that has a functional middle-class job. And I think that we need to be offering a lot of those opportunities, whether it's community college, whether it's expanding trade schools, whether it's internships or apprenticeships. I think we really need to be doing that. And I think we should probably look at how we handle some of the professions, law for example, and look at doing things like apprenticeships in the rural areas because they are just simply underserved communities. I drive anywhere from Springvale to Millinocket. I have a huge practice area. because there aren't attorneys in those areas, and there could be.
Mr. Horn.
Yeah, I think we need more vocational training. We offer vocational programs in the high school. College is great. It's a fantastic experience, but not everyone needs to go to college necessarily. They should be able to go if they want. But you know, people in Jared's and my generation are supposed to have statistically 3 full careers, meaning there needs to be more education. So we need to have adult training. Also, to produce skills that aren't just manual labor. Manufacturing isn't as prevalent now, and as people get older, we have an older population who still needs to work. We need to teach them tech, teach them IT, teach them all sorts of skills that will help them operate in the 21st century and to, you know, increase entrepreneurship, you know.
All right. Well, let's continue the discussion then. And this is kind of a toss-up question. You can go anywhere you want with it. If you're elected, tell the voters what is the accomplishment you're going to have that we're going to be talking about 2 years from now. Let's start with you, Will.
There's so much legislation that I'd like to start on, but I guess legislation that ensures health care for everyone and protects people's health care. I believe health care is a right, and that's where my focus is going to be, is solving solutions for people so they can have a chance at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which you can't if you have no health care.
Tiffany Bond, what would be the accomplishment we're talking about?
Well, if I get elected, I will have done so as a middle-class person on less than $5,000. I'm not taking campaign contributions. I ask people instead, you can see on the Maine Raising hashtag, I ask people, please shop in our community, donate to our community. Say I won't take the money. I will not fundraise. And what that does is it puts me in a position where I actually can read the legislation. I can tell you about it. We can have a conversation. We can talk about what helps us, what helps our communities, and we can have that ongoing dialogue. You get to have actual representation where somebody isn't going through day by day fundraising just for the next election. To fundraise $1 million if you're doing it 50 hours a week, that's $500, or 50 weeks a year is $500 an hour. How many people can do that and also work in Congress?
Representative Golden, what will we be talking about 2 years from now if you're in Congress?
People are going to talk about how I'm fighting for the middle class, Pat. It's that simple. I'm going to fight to make sure that we're doing everything we can to raise wages that have been flat and stagnant for far too long. I'm going to fight to make sure that the middle class continues to get tax breaks instead of giving it all to millionaires and billionaires like Bruce's tax plan did. I'm going to fight to protect Medicare, to protect Medicaid and Social Security from those who would take a budget plan like Paul Ryan's, like Bruce Poliquin supports, and use it to balance a budget that they have completely thrown off track with their tax giveaway to millionaires and billionaires. And finally, I'm going to be part of a Democratic-led Congress that works with the President of the United States on infrastructure, going big on rebuilding America, instead of trying to take, like Bruce Poliquin voted before, to take health care away, to repeal the Affordable Care Act, to leave people vulnerable with pre-existing conditions, to lacking.
What are you going to do in the next 2 years if you're in Congress again that we're going to talk about?
I just want to mention this, Pat, before we get going. I hope everybody's watching. I want to make sure everybody sees this. We have a young radical who just can't tell the truth, and it's this class warfare. Those who have worked really hard and scrubbed toilets to get ahead against those who are struggling to go up the. Now let me answer your question. We've got to make sure that we secure our borders. We know who's in this country. I've been so tough on border security, Pat, because 80% of the cheap, deadly heroin that's coming into this country comes over the Mexican border and finds its way to Maine. Jared Golden, on the other hand, believes in sanctuary cities. He thinks if a police officer stops someone who's in the country illegally, you can't notify the immigration police. That's how radical and extreme he is. We need to secure our borders, know who's in this country. That's what I think we'll be talking about in 2 years.
All right, we're going to take a break.
And talk about immigration when we come back, Pat.
Well, we're going to take a break. We're going to have our closing statements, believe it or not, coming up on our Voice of the Voter candidate forum.
Maine small businesses need representatives who will keep this economy growing. But Jared Golden is ranked one of Maine's most liberal politicians. Golden voted to raise sales and income taxes. He got a 0% small business rating. and he opposes tax cuts that are helping Maine families and small businesses. Jared Golden talks like a moderate, but he votes just like Nancy Pelosi. Congressional Leadership Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Who works for Maine veterans and healthcare? Our Congressman, Bruce Poliquin.
Bruce listens and he really cares. The ads that Jared Golden are running against Bruce Poliquin are just not true.
Bruce is a man of action. He's getting our local hospitals paid by the VA. He's saving healthcare and jobs for Maine people.
Bruce gets the job done. We need to keep Bruce Poliquin working for Maine.
I'm Bruce Poliquin, and I approve this message.
When you need a doctor, you should ask, how fast can I get there? Not, how am I going to pay for it? But Sean Moody would make you think twice about both. Moody opposes expanding healthcare coverage in Maine, leaving rural hospitals without the resources they need, and 89,000 Mainers without critical care. We can't afford Sean Moody as governor because he won't think twice about our healthcare. The top funder of A Better Maine is the Democratic Governors Association.
Over 30 million people have made Manifest TV's #1 news show.
You're one of the chosen.
She was killed because she was on that plane. Any one of us could be next.
Who are you? Manifest, tonight 10/9 Central on NBC.
Now to our journey across America.
When we get done, Chicago will be the safest big city in this country.
You're talking about housing.
I'm talking about employment opportunities.
We see, and for the first time, emerge stories that impact hometowns across this country.
Welcome back to our Voice of the Voter Candidate Forum. We're talking with the candidates for Congress in Maine's 2nd District. It's been a lively discussion. We hope it has shed some light as well as generated some heat, the light being more important, in fact, when it comes to make a decision. We come time now for our closing statements from each of the candidates. They'll each have 1 minute to make their case to you. We begin with Will Hoare of Southwest Harbor, a special education teacher, making his first run for public office.
Thank you. In this job, leadership is service. If you, not to special interests, not to political parties, not to money, but to you, the people of Maine's 2nd District. If you want someone who is going to fight only for you, then I'm your guy. I live and work amongst the community. I am trying to make the world a better place. And as you can see from today's example, partisan politics has reached a crazy level. And in my mind, there are no sides in doing the right thing. You need to work together to find solutions, not fight against one another. We aim for a government that's of the people and for the people and by the people. Let's get back to that. And if you agree, vote for me.
Will Hoare, thanks very much. Next, another independent in the race, Tiffany Bond, an attorney from Portland, also making your first run for office. Your turn.
I am. How did you feel about the commercials you just saw on the break? They're pretty gross, right? Let's not do that. Let's treat this like a job, and let's treat this job interview like we're looking for the skills we need for this job. And this job is reading thousands of pages of proposed legislation every week. I love to do that. Let me roll up my sleeves, let me dig in, let's wait around, and let's have a conversation. You can find me on Twitter at Tiffany Bond, and I'll talk with you. I'll explain things to you. We can talk about what federal law really does and really doesn't do, and we'll talk about what it means to you. If any of you have watched the media the last few weeks, there's a lot of people who felt really left out. There's a lot of people who felt really left behind. That's not going to happen with me. So let's make politics the way it should be, where we're hiring somebody who focuses on skills and functionality.
All right, Tiffany Bond, thanks so much. The Democrat in the race this year is State Representative Jared Golden of Lewiston. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Pat. You know, folks, unfortunately, you've heard a lot of lies about me tonight. So, for instance, Bruce Poliquin just suggested that I support open borders and the safe harbor of criminals in our cities. Nothing could be further from the truth. I served this country in the United States Marine Corps to fight to protect our borders. I worked for Senator Susan Collins on the Homeland Security Committee with Customs and Border Patrol and with ICE to secure our borders. Now, Bruce is treating these types of issues, and he has been all night, as though it is just some kind of political game. That's why we have so much dysfunction in Congress. Now, when I was in the United States Marine, I learned from the best leaders in the world, people who understood that it's not about taking credit, the kinds of leaders who would share credit with the team for coming together to get the job done right. And the very best leaders are the ones who, when things went wrong, didn't point fingers like they do down in Washington, but instead just accepted responsibility for failure. Just imagine what we could do if Congress and America would work together like that. That's the kind of leader that I will be for you down in Washington. That is not the kind of leadership that Bruce Poliquin has shown for you tonight.
And finally, Congressman Bruce Poliquin.
Thank you. The people of our hardworking people of our 2nd District have a real choice. I'm the only individual on this stage that has 35 years of experience creating jobs. That's why I work so hard to make sure we have less red tape, lower taxes, and fair trade deals. None of these individuals have that experience, and our economy is doing much better. We need to keep going in this direction. Now, Jared took some shots at me, and that's fine, but he's voted 100% of the time in the state legislature against small businesses, and if he's in this seat, he'll continue to work to jack up your taxes. We need to make sure that we have access to health care. That means driving down the cost so folks can afford it. One of the ways to do that is to make sure our veterans, and I serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee, gets health care closer to home and our small hospitals get paid. Also, I'm in the constitutional business. Anybody that serves in this office needs to make sure we stand up for our constitutional rights, including our Second Amendment rights. I have an A rating with the NRA, plus rating with the Gun Owners of Maine. Jared Golden has a D rating with the NRA and an F rating with the Gun Owners of Maine. I'm the only person on this stage that will stand up for your constitutional Second Amendment rights. And I do this in a bipartisan way. Thanks.
Congressman Poliquin, thank you very much. This concludes our first of 4 live candidate forums leading up to election night. Next Wednesday, October 17th, we'll be live from Augusta with our gubernatorial forum. Our first Congressional District forum is set for Monday, October 22nd. The U.S. Senate candidate forum for the following week on Monday, October 29th. All of those forums begin at 7 o'clock. And we invite you to stay with Newscenter Maine for all of your 2018 Voice of the Voter coverage. Got a quick question for everybody. All it takes is one quick answer. What's something you know to be sure? What do you know for sure? Will Horp.
That Maine is the best state in the United States.
Tiffany Bond.
We make great stuff.
Jared Golden.
I love the state of Maine. I love the United States of America.
What do you know for sure, Congressman?
Simone's Hot Dog Stand in Lewiston is the best restaurant in America, and Moxie is the best beverage ever produced on this planet.
Good call. Good call. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us. Have a good night, everyone. We'll see you again tonight on Newscenter at 11.